Today I'm finally out here with one of the cars that you guys have most frequently requested over the last few months, the all-new 2019 Volkswagen Jetta. This all-new generation of Jetta is attempting to correct some of the complaints that people had about the previous generation of the Jetta. Some folks out there thought that it was just a little bit too discount feeling on the inside and that the overall driving dynamics didn't quite match what people expected out of the Jetta. But they've definitely changed things for this generation. The model that we've been driving this week is the SEL trim. We have LED headlamps up here. We have this new Volkswagen grille that we see in some of their other product lines. No fog lights down there at the bottom, but we do have a radar adaptive cruise control sensor behind that Volkswagen logo. As you approach the new Jetta, the first thing you'll really notice is how much the Jetta has grown in this generation. This is now over 185 inches long, meaning this is actually about 2 inches longer than a 1990s Toyota Camry. This is definitely the longest entry in this segment. It's about a full 9 inches longer than a Hyundai Ioniq and about 2 to 3 inches longer than something along the lines of the new 2020 Corolla. All of that extra length practically goes right back here to the rear seat area because we now have one of the roomiest cabins in this segment, and a lot of it also goes back here to the trunk because we do have a very generous cargo area. In kind of an interesting twist, because the Jetta spent so long on the taffy stretcher in this generation, this will actually no longer be sold in Europe. So this will now be sold only in the United States, South America, Canada, etc. And then we'll actually get a stretched version in China. Out back, that sharp line continues. It integrates with these tail lamp modules right here and then curves down, and we have this overhanging section of the trunk lid, which again is very similar to what we saw on the side. Let me know what you think about this down there in the comments section below as well. We have full LED tail lamp modules back here, which is a very nice touch, including amber turn signals, which is definitely my preference. The model that we're looking at this week is the SEL trim, so we have a little SEL badge right there on the front fender. Now there is an SEL premium trim that is above this. It does have a few more options than the one that we're looking at. For this generation, Volkswagen decided to push some of their active safety technologies down into lower-end trims of the Jetta. However, that does not include the base trim. So if you want a feature like automatic emergency braking, you will have to work your way one trim level up in the overall lineup. If you want radar adaptive cruise control, then you'll only find that in the upper-end trims. The model that we've been driving this week has basically everything that Volkswagen has to offer: automatic emergency braking, lane keeping assist via a camera right there behind the windscreen. We also have blind spot monitoring as well. LED headlamps are standard, but not the ones that we saw up front. These are optional. The standard headlamps are a different design, but still LEDs. Under the hood, we have a 1.4-liter four-cylinder engine in all trim levels except for the GLI. This produces 147 horsepower and 187 pound-feet of torque. If you opt for the Jetta GLI, then you get a 2-liter four-cylinder engine that produces 228 horsepower. It's borrowed from the Volkswagen GTI. The base model Jetta gets a manual transmission, but most of the versions you'll find on dealer lots will have this 8-speed automatic transmission made by Aisin. Now, if you get the Jetta GLI, then you get your choice of either manual transmission or a 7-speed dual clutch, basically in any version. It's obvious that overall fuel economy was a big focus for this generation of Jetta. Whether you get the 6-speed manual or the 8-speed automatic transmission, all versions of the Jetta with the 1.4 will get 34 miles per gallon combined. But in our real-world driving, this vehicle absolutely blows those EPA numbers out of the water and is simply the most efficient non-hybrid entry in this segment. Now, there is a little bit of a rub, of course, and that is the fact that even this top-end trim does get those 205 with tires, and that does affect overall handling. You'll definitely see the difference when you compare this to top-end trims of the Honda Civic. It gets much wider tires, and that does drop its overall fuel economy score down a little bit. In our front seat comfort score, I'm going to give these seats 8 out of 10 points. These are the seats that you're going to find in most of the trims. It is a manual design without adjustable lumbar support. I really do wish we found powered seats in more of the trims, but you'll only find it in the very top-end trim of the Jetta. We do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, and a very similar range of motion over here on the passenger seat because it's manual as well. Hopping into the back seat, I'm going to give this 10 out of 10 points because we quite simply find more room in here than we find in any other compact sedan except for the Honda Civic. Several inches more than we'll find in the Ioniq, the Elantra, etc., or even the new 2020 Corolla. With this front seat easily adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you can see I have about 4 inches of legroom left. It's all due to the overall size of the Jetta. And perhaps more surprising than that, even though we do have a fairly swoopy roofline here, I can actually sit upright back here and my hair is barely brushing the ceiling. I only have about a 1/4 inch of headroom left, but that is significantly more than we find in just about any other compact sedan out there. So if you're looking for an option in this category that has more room in the back seat, this is definitely going to be the one for you. If I move over to the middle seat, the headroom does drop down a little bit. I do have to crane my head to one side, but if I scoot all the way over to the right, and this front seat is all the way back in its tracks. I had a 6'5" person sitting there very comfortably. I have about 1/2 inch of legroom left there, and again, I can still sit very upright back here and very comfortably. One of the other things you'll notice back here is that the overall width of the Jetta has also increased over time. So we actually have a fairly wide and comfortable armrest back here for the rear seat passengers. The rear seats fold in a 60/40 fashion, but you have to do that from the trunk. When it comes to overall cargo capacity, obviously a liftback like a Prius or an Ioniq are going to beat what we find in the Jetta, but at 14.1 cubic feet, this is among the largest in its segment, and it's also among the most practically shaped because it is very, very tall. So I can actually fit a 22-inch roller bag in this position and just barely squeeze them in the trunk right like that. And the trunk lid will actually close. So this means you could line up about 4 of these 22-inch roller bags right there across the back of the trunk, stick the larger luggage way on in because this trunk is pretty deep. See how deep it is right back there. And this will hold a lot more luggage than something like a Corolla or a Civic, even though overall trunk dimensions don't appear too far off. This is the same sort of thing that we see in the Nissan Sentra, where they've made the trunk a little bit taller to accommodate some of those larger bags more easily. So even though this vehicle does not score any extra 24-inch roller bags in our roller bag score versus the largest trunk in this segment, overall practicality, I would actually say, is better. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the SEL, not the SEL Premium version of the Jetta, so there are a few extra things you'll find in that model. However, we do have a pretty large moonroof. It's not a panoramic style, but it does go actually a little bit past the B-pillar there in the vehicle. It's a little bit larger than normal. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable headrests. There's a little button right there on the side of the headrest to adjust it. And then our model has the VTEX leatherette upholstery, so this is imitation leather. You'll actually find most of the trims of Jetta will have this particular interior upholstery. You will find real leather if you get the top-end SEL Premium version, but that's really the only one you'll find it in. Moving over to the front doors, we find a mixture of hard and soft touch plastic. So we have a soft touch upper section of the door, soft touch insert right there in the middle, and a soft armrest. But the rest of the plastics are hard, especially down there around the speaker grill and the bottle holder at the bottom of the door. That's pretty standard in this segment. We do have some extra textures going on there, as you can see at the bottom of that storage cubby. And then the trim in this cabin is a sort of an imitation brushed metal look. I'm actually not sure whether this is supposed to be brushed metal or sort of a very light lacquered wood, but either way, it's relatively attractive compared to what we see in most of the alternatives. As we see in most of Volkswagen's cars, there's an awful lot of black going on in this cabin. We do have a lighter colored headliner and a lighter colored A-pillar. You can see the speaker grille right there in that A-pillar, but the bulk of this dashboard is black on black on black. The glove box on the passenger side is one of the bin varieties. I was able to fit a large tablet computer in there, and you can see up at the top of that area, we actually have the SD card for the mapping database and a single slot optical disc player. So that's neatly tucked away inside the glove compartment. Moving from the dashboard on over to the center of the dashboard, we find more of that imitation trim, whatever that is supposed to be. We then have an 8-inch color touchscreen infotainment system. A 6.5-inch system is standard, and this features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support. This is the latest Volkswagen software version, so there are a lot of really nice touches in the system. It's very easy to use. We have a pretty typical Bluetooth interface, media interface. This model has the up-level sound system, so we have a few more options there than we would find in the base model. And overall, this system is definitely very easy to use. To the left of that, we find Volkswagen's excellent digital cockpit. This is something that we haven't seen in vehicles as inexpensive as the Jetta before, but you'll only find this in the SEL and SEL Premium versions of the Jetta. If we zoom out from there a little bit, we find 2 air vents below that infotainment system. The dual-zone automatic climate control, we find that in most versions of the Jetta. A fairly large storage cubby right there. Single USB port for the interfacing with that system. We have our engine start-stop button over here, electric parking brake, auto start-stop enable-disable button, drive mode button. This allows us to choose between things like eco, sport, normal, and a custom mode, 12-volt power port, and a pretty traditional console shifter. Drive is all the way back like there. We toggle once back for sport mode. We push over to the right for the manual control mode, push away from the driver for up, pull towards the driver for gear down. Between the front seats, we find 2 large cup holders. I had no problem fitting large takeout drinks in there, and a small cubby to the left of that where you could put pens or pencils. The center armrest is softly padded. It's covered in the same imitation leather as the seats themselves, and then it opens to reveal a different colored storage cubby. It actually matches the headliner in the vehicle, and then we have a USB charge-only port right there at the back. The optional digital cockpit features 2 gauges that are not part of the LCD, engine temperature on the left and fuel level on the right. Those are just LED gauges. Everything else is being delivered by this full LCD in the middle. There are a few different views that you can choose. We can swap between these 3 different views via a button over here on the steering wheel. The display is configurable. You can use this toggle right here on the steering wheel to choose what you see right there in the center of the display. And then, oddly enough, you would use the infotainment system to cycle through different options for the left side and the right side of the instrument cluster. So I'm actually cycling through those options using that 8-inch touchscreen in the center of the dash. Although this display is not quite as flashy as the displays that we find in modern Audi products, this is unquestionably one of the most fully featured LCD instrument clusters you'll find in the mainstream segment. Moving out from there, we have a 3-spoke steering wheel with a slight flat bottom on it. On the right side, we have the controls for controlling that multifunction LCD instrument cluster. We can toggle between the pages with this button right here, then toggle among the options with this one, voice command button. The view button is what changes between those major view modes. We then have track forward, backward on the right, and then volume up, down on the left side of the steering wheel, along with the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control systems and a button to enable and disable active safety systems on the car.
Thanks to the standard turbocharged engine, 0 to 60 acceleration happens in 7.7 seconds. That's a little bit faster than most of the mainline competition that does not have a turbocharged engine standard, but definitely slower than the turbocharged Honda Civic. The 1.5-liter turbo and continuously variable transmission in the current generation Civic are really an excellent pairing for 0 to 60 acceleration and just all-around performance. In our 60 to 0 braking test, the Jetta took 123 feet to stop from highway speeds back down to 0, which puts this right in the middle of the pack. That's to be expected because the tire size that we found on this model is pretty average for the overall compact segment. As we've come to expect from the Jetta, it definitely has a Germanic feel out on the road. The suspension is a little bit firmer than many of the competitors in this segment, and the steering feel is definitely a little bit heavier and a little bit more direct than something like a Toyota Corolla or a Hyundai Elantra. But again, it's important to remember that the Jetta comes only in the standard flavor with the 1.4-liter turbo that we've been driving this week and the Jetta GLI. There aren't too many different versions of this like we do see in some of the competitors, for instance, the Honda Civic. The Civic is available in standard trims, sport trims, turbo, non-turbo trims, the Civic Si, and of course the fire-breathing Type R. You'll definitely notice that the suspension is very middle of the road for this segment. It's not as firm as some of those sportier entries like a Honda Civic Si, but not as soft as something like the base version of the Toyota Corolla. The Jetta does a really good job of straddling the fence when it comes to overall ride and overall handling ability. That's why I'm giving both of these categories an A in our testing. In our cabin noise test, we measured 72 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which puts this a little bit louder than the quietest entries in this segment, but again, very middle of the road overall for a mainstream compact sedan. Where the Jetta really excels is in overall fuel economy. We have been getting over 36 miles per gallon during the week that we've had this vehicle, which is notably above its EPA score. That surprised us a great deal because very few of the compact sedans in this category exceed their EPA rating. That fuel economy average puts this above the turbocharged engine in the Honda Civic, which has long been a favorite here at Alex and Autos, and it puts this in very direct competition, even in the top-end trim that we were driving, with the eco trims of the competition, like the Elantra Eco, or the hybrid alternatives that you also find here, like the new Toyota Corolla hybrid, and perhaps even something like an Ioniq hybrid. Now, those hybrids are definitely going to get better fuel economy than this, but you will find this excellent fuel economy in all trims of the Jetta, not just a specific hybrid model. That distinction is pretty important when you compare this to something like the Corolla, which is only available in one trim for the hybrid, so you can't get any of the up-level options that we've seen in this interior if you want that higher fuel economy over there in the Toyota. Overall, out on the road, the Jetta is an excellent performer. If you'd been hoping that this would be an inexpensive Audi A3, you may be a little bit disappointed because the overall performance, handling, and braking scores aren't where the A3 is, even though there are some related bits under the sheet metal. On the other hand, if you were looking for an efficient alternative to a Corolla or a Civic that definitely has good driving dynamics, this is exactly what you're looking for. Volkswagen has had a little bit of trouble trying to find traction in America lately, and as a result of that, they've gone in different directions with different generations of their product lines. There have been Jettas that were very premium feeling in the cabin, and then the last generation Jetta definitely felt very discount compared to a lot of the competition, especially the newer competition from Korea. With the 2019 Jetta, Volkswagen has, I think, really tried to solidify a position in the middle of the segment rather than at either of the two extremes, and I think that's a much better idea. For 2019, the base price is $18,745. That does get you a manual transmission, and you won't get the same sort of autonomous braking systems and safety systems that we see standard in the Corolla and the Civic. Adding those options onto the Jetta will effectively raise its price a little bit versus the mainline competitors in this segment, but it's not as far apart as some Jettas have been in the past. As you look at the list of features on your screen, you'll notice that only the base model has those two features optional. Every other trim will have the standard 8-speed automatic transmission, and they will also at least have the autonomous braking package. Now, it's worth noting that if you want features that are commonly asked for in new cars, like radar adaptive cruise control and leather upholstery, you will only find those features in the top-end trims. You'll find leather only in the topmost trim and adaptive cruise control in the top two trims only. Again, that's pretty different than what we see in the Japanese competitors because the Civic and the Corolla both include full-speed radar cruise control standard. It could be argued that the lack of leather in mainstream Jetta trims is more of a feature than a bug because we are seeing an industry-wide trend of manufacturers moving to leather alternatives rather than leather in a lot of their mainstream vehicles. With that out of the way, let's dive into the first competitor, the all-new 2020 Corolla. This is the newest entry in this segment other than the Volkswagen Jetta. For 2020, the Corolla didn't change too much in terms of overall exterior size, but the interior, oddly enough, did shrink versus the last generation model, and that's made a big difference when you start comparing internal size numbers between the Jetta, which is definitely on the large side of this segment, and the Corolla. You'll find an awful lot more interior room inside the Jetta, especially legroom. Now, overall headroom is still a little bit limited in any of these vehicles, but the extra legroom means that it's going to be a lot easier to put a rear-facing child seat in the Jetta than in many of the smaller alternatives in this segment. So if you're a young family and you do have kids in those rear-facing seats, keep in mind they're going to fit a little bit easier in the Jetta. The Jetta also gives us a little bit more cargo room in the trunk, which is appreciated. Now, on the downside, the Jetta has never been as reliable as the Corolla, and even though it is very fuel efficient, it's not as efficient as the optional hybrid system that we find in the Toyota. Of course, I have to say that I'm willing to give up a little bit of efficiency for the overall driving nature of the Jetta. The Corolla has really come a long way in this last generation to make a more exciting Corolla than they ever have in the past, but it still is not that same level of engagement that we find in the Jetta. When it comes to active safety features, the two vehicles are very well matched in terms of overall capability, but you will find those active safety features on much lower price points in the Corolla than in the Jetta. Even the base model of the Corolla gets standard radar adaptive cruise control, and again, that's not something that we find in the Jetta until the very top-end trim. One last thing to know about the Jetta is that top-end trim where you get radar adaptive cruise control doesn't really have a corollary in the Corolla lineup, because Toyota chose not to expand the price range of the Corolla as far as we see in some of the competition. They've kept it pretty narrow. We don't get a lot of those premium options available in the Corolla that you will find in the Jetta, but as a result, its price range and its price tag doesn't expand as large as the Volkswagen. Next up, we have a long-term favorite here at Alex & Autos, the Honda Civic. The Civic is very, very well-rounded, from its overall driving nature to its fuel economy, the seat comfort, the cargo capacity, etc. That's one of the reasons that even if the Civic is not a top pick in a particular category that I'm comparing with, the Civic is generally always a you-can't-go-wrong pick. Now, versus the Volkswagen Jetta, the Honda Civic is not feeling as fresh, and in the very top-end trims, it definitely doesn't have the wow factor that we see in the top-end Jetta that we were driving. The Jetta definitely has a more European feel to it, a more premium feel to it than we find in the Honda Civic, although it is going to be, generally speaking, a little bit less reliable. When comparing drivetrains, you should know that the Civic does not get the turbo engine standard. You do have to work your way on up the trim ladder in order to get that. Base models will instead use a naturally aspirated four-cylinder engine that's going to deliver lower performance than the turbo that we find standard in the Volkswagen. Now, on the flip side, the 1.5-liter turbo in the Civic definitely gives us better acceleration with relatively similar fuel economy to what we get in the Volkswagen. As with the Toyota Corolla, Honda sensing is standard, so that's another big point of differentiation because, again, that base model is going to get adaptive cruise control. And if you're looking for manual transmissions and different levels of performance, you'll find those in the Civic lineup. You won't find those at the moment in the Jetta lineup. Now, we do have the Jetta GLI coming very soon. It's going to give us 225 horsepower approximately, but that's less than we find in the Honda Civic Type R, although it is more than we find in the Honda Civic Si. Jetta versus Civic is a pretty tough comparison for me because I really liked both vehicles. I think the Jetta does a better job at competing with the Civic in the lower end trim, so Jetta 1.4T versus the base naturally aspirated engine in the Honda Civic. And then I think the Jetta does a good job of competing with the very top end trim of the Civic Touring, because we get the snazzier LCDs going on inside the cabin of the Jetta, and the overall feel is a little bit more premium than that top end Civic model. But I think that the Civic does a better job at competing in the mainstream trims between either of those two extremes. Next up, we have the Kia Forte, the freshest entry from Korea. I think that the Jetta is a little bit more attractive than the Forte overall. On the flip side, the Forte has excellent fuel economy. It also has excellent driving dynamics in this generation, and we are expecting a sportier version of the Forte coming soon. It has a large and practical backseat, a decent amount of legroom back there. Headroom is still limited because of the overall design, and it has a pretty big trunk. The Forte is also a good option if you're looking for something with a long warranty, because it does have a much longer warranty than the average entry in this group. The Forte also excels when it comes to a low sticker price. It starts just under $18,000, and you're more likely to find deals on it at the Kia dealer than on the Jetta at the Volkswagen dealer at the moment. That value proposition continues as you work your way up to the very top end trims of the Forte, because those are going to be notably less expensive than the Volkswagen Jetta. Overall performance is not going to be too far off, but the Jetta does seem to be a little bit quicker 0 to 60. And fuel economy is definitely impressive in the Volkswagen as well, and that's something that has never really been Kia's forte. Next up, we have one of our long-term favorites in the compact segment, the Hyundai Ioniq. This is a compact sedan with a little bit of a twist, because the Ioniq is available only as a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, or an electric vehicle in the United States. It's not available as a standard compact vehicle like the Volkswagen Jetta is. But the Ioniq still competes very well here, because Hyundai's general design of the Ioniq gives it excellent handling, much better handling than we thought it would initially. A lot of that has to do with the rear suspension design we find in the Ioniq. For some reason, Hyundai gave it an independent rear suspension, which is definitely different than the Hyundai Elantra. In terms of overall dynamics and overall feel, especially on broken pavement, I prefer the way the Ioniq handles versus a comparably equipped Elantra. So if you put the same tires on your Elantra, same tires on your Ioniq, I prefer the way the Ioniq drives. The hybrid system also has the effect of shifting some weight to the rear. The Ioniq also gives us a practical and comfortable rear seat area. We get a little bit more headroom than in many of the alternatives because of the overall shape. And if you didn't know it, the Ioniq really is a liftback, not a sedan. And that gives us incredible cargo practicality versus every other compact vehicle in this group. You'll find nearly double the cargo capacity in that trunk versus most of the entries in the compact sedan segment. In addition to having more cargo room, the Ioniq is also very cargo practical, because you can put larger items like large barbecues in there. Admittedly, you wouldn't be able to close the hatch, but you'd be able to get them completely inside the vehicle, and you wouldn't be able to do that in any of the sedan competition. Fuel economy is also excellent in the Ioniq, and that will largely compensate for the steeper price tag. The Ioniq is going to be more expensive than especially the base entries of the competition, but it comes well equipped, and bumping from 30 miles per gallon on up to 50 or 55 miles per gallon is definitely going to save you money. On the downside, the Ioniq is getting a refresh here very soon, and that is noticeable on the inside, because the Ioniq doesn't feel as fresh as the new Volkswagen Jetta. And that's why the Ioniq is not going to be my top pick in this segment. I have to say that at the moment, it's the Volkswagen Jetta. When it comes right down to it, the fresher looks in the Jetta help nudge it into the first place spot for me in the compact sedan segment at the moment. Now, I have yet to drive the refreshed Honda Civic or the upcoming refresh of the Hyundai Ioniq. Once I do, that may change the math a little bit, but any way you slice it, these three entries are going to be the best of the compact sedans in America, for some slightly different reasons. I think, again, the Jetta does really well in the base trims and in the top end trim. I think the Honda Civic does well in the meat of this segment, and the Ioniq is an excellent option if you're looking to save money and have a more practical vehicle overall. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. If you haven't already done so, go over to facebook.com/AlexNautos so you can see what we're driving this week. Click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support this channel, and I hope you do, and I'll see you later.